Good afternoon. I'm Matt Driskill, editor of Asian Aviation Magazine and AsianAviation.com. Welcome to the latest in conversation, sponsored by Metrojet of Hong Kong. Today we are speaking again with Subhas Menon, one of my favorite guests. He's the Director General of the Association of Asia-Pacific Airlines. Subhas, welcome back. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Matt, for having me again.
Good to see you again. I can't remember the last time we spoke. I know it was a few months ago, but aviation, I don't know if it's roaring back into business, but I just as we were talking before we came on the air, I flew to the U.S. My wife and son flew to Paris last night. Airports are busy. The airlines seem to be, doing a lot better. What are your AAPA members telling you about their business?
Well, it's definitely roaring back to life. I think the pace of recovery varies from place to place, and that is very much dependent on when the borders were completely reopened. So, if you take ASEAN and India, for instance, they are already maybe about 75% to 2019 levels. In fact, India has already exceeded 2019 levels. But if you consider North Asia, like Japan, Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, they really reopened their borders only in November. So they're still maybe about between 50 to 60% of 2019 levels. And then you have China, and China is now at about 24% of 2019 levels, because China really fully reopened only in April. So, but in terms of recovery, in terms of growth, all markets are really, firing on all cylinders.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can tell you from my own experience, just like traveling between Cambodia and Singapore, the flights are full. And again, I went to the U.S. I went to Europe a few months ago. Everything was good. And AAPA came out with its numbers for July the other day. Passenger traffic, I think the term you used was robust, but cargo seems to be slipping a little bit. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I think passenger and cargo are moving in different directions. It's just like two people going on a stairway in opposite directions. So this is not uncommon. This has happened before. But I was reading the IMF report, which shed some light on this. So it says that there is a shift in exports from goods to services. So services generally, F&B, air travel, they are all doing very well. It's as though people, after having spent a lot of money during COVID on all kinds of goods that they probably didn't need at that point in time, to going out and enjoying themselves, entertainment, F&B, trying to meet up with long lost friends and family, and businesses, trying to reconnect with their associates and partners, So that's what's happening. And we talk about full employment and, job vacancies, but that is only in the services sector. So tourism hubs are doing very well, whereas manufacturing hubs are not doing very well. And I think inflation has something to do with it as well, in terms of the export of goods, So whereas cargo is usually the weather vane of the economy is not doing well, cargo is not doing well. Passenger services now is actually driving the growth in the economy.
Well, it sounds like you got a thunderstorm going on there in Singapore. Is that thunder I heard, or what?
Actually, I'm very close to the airport in Pasir Ris, so it was the planes.
Okay, good.
My windows, everything shut.
That's okay. That's a good soundtrack for the video. I want to talk to you again, and back to what you were saying. I mean, and again, it's my own unscientific. I look around at passengers, and you can sort of tell who's a business passenger, you have the families going on vacation and things like that. A lot of people predicted that business travel would not come back as fast as leisure travel, going to see grandma and grandpa, et cetera, et cetera. I would say, that business travel has probably come back as fast. Would you agree with that?
Yes, in fact, our numbers show that leisure traffic or coach traffic, let's say coach traffic, as well as business class travel, is really both of them are strong, and I suspect that it's mainly business travel and visiting friends and relatives traffic, that is driving this growth. Leisure, I think there is a class of people who are traveling for leisure, but that probably takes a bit longer to come back, and it's more tied to discretionary income. Whereas for businessmen, I think they need to reconnect. They need to go and look for business. They have to catch up with their factories. They have to catch up with their associates and partners. So that is very, very strong. And when we look at the forward bookings as well, it shows resilience, both in business class as well as in economy class, right into 2024.
Are there any areas specific to Asia that you see forward bookings higher or lower?
No, actually, it's across the board, and I saw a WTTC report the other day, and it was saying that advance bookings for 2024 and 2025 107% up, for instance, versus 2019 and 2020, when we look at the same time frame, for the advance booking. So that is a very good indication. In other words, it is even stronger than what it was pre-COVID.
Okay. I saw a story the other day. China and the U.S. announced that they would be increasing flights between the two countries. I can't remember if they were going to double the number of flights or something like that. Obviously, it's a good thing for the airlines. There are some tensions, as everybody knows, between China and the U.S. at the moment, and China and the Philippines, and things like that. What do you see happening with China right now? Not necessarily between China and the U.S. Those flights are going to double and whatever, but what do you see happening with China specifically?
Well, talking about China and the US, actually the US airlines have been pushing the DOT to allow them to operate to China. Chinese carriers have already been starting to operate flights to the US. And it's interesting that the Chinese carriers are actually avoiding the Russian airspace on their way to the US. I suppose it's an effort to keep the peace. So there could be a thaw in the relations, at least as far as air travel is concerned, which is a very good sign. The US market actually has reached saturation point as far as domestic travel is concerned. So the US airlines are now venturing outwards. They're looking for international markets to exploit. So China, of course, is the number two travel market in the world, and there has to be a lot of connectivity between the number one and number two air travel markets in the world. So I think it's a good sign. And China, of course, let's not forget that China was the last to reopen its borders. It's 12 months behind the rest of the world. So naturally, at this point in time, it looks like it is a very subdued recovery. But I think it will gather pace as we go along in China. Once Chinese travelers come back in full force, you can expect that the recovery will be full and complete, and the air travel market will be moving towards growth.
Well, and I noticed the other day there was something from Brisbane Airport that China Southern was going to increase flights there. So they're also looking to go not just to the U.S. and everything, but also within the Asia-Pacific region. So that's going to be interesting.
Yes, in fact, to Australia, I think Chinese carriers have already put back 60% of their flights from 2019. So that's a very good sign. Also, within Asia Pacific, at the moment, the other airlines are operating more flights into China than Chinese carriers into countries in Asia Pacific region. But it's all a matter of time.
Well, I've got you here. I mean, I want to ask about Southeast Asia, which is where I'm based. You're in Singapore, I think, right now. I'm in Cambodia. Used to be in Singapore. Do you see the Chinese travelers returning to ASEAN countries?
Yes, I think there's a strong return. to ASEAN countries. I was in Thailand several times this year for meetings. I was in Chiang Mai, I was in Bangkok, and you can see Chinese travelers everywhere. They are being welcomed with open arms. I think that's the case in Malaysia. In Singapore, not so much, because I think the cost in Singapore is really very high for the Chinese travelers. But the Chinese are also venturing out, and the Chinese government has expanded the list of authorized destinations for Chinese travelers. So that's a very good sign.
Okay, good. Subhas, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to hear from our sponsor, Metrojet of Hong Kong. We'll be right back after this.
We're going to have the crown jewels of Asia, and I promise you we're going to have the nicest and busiest business aviation hangar in the region.
And we're back. We're talking with Subhas Menon. I always wonder if I'm pronouncing Menon right. Am I pronouncing it right?
Yes, it's correct.
Okay. He is Director General of the Association of Asia-Pacific Airlines. Subhas, are your members able to, let's talk about capacity a little bit, because so many planes were grounded, thousands of planes were grounded. You can't just flip a switch and bring them back. They've got to go through checks. They've got to go through MRO. The engines, the fluids have to be replaced, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do your members, have they gotten everything out of storage and into the pipeline? Are they adding capacity? Qantas the other day mentioned that they were going to add another 250,000 international seats in terms of capacity. What are your members telling you about capacity and bringing their planes back?
Yeah, that's, you really hit the nail on the head. Quite often I feel that in this industry, it's a bit like driving a car by just looking at the rear view mirror. So in 2019, I think everything was going very well, hunky-dory, and airlines were ordering aircraft, and planning to capitalize on the growth. And then 2019 happened, so they deferred many deliveries, they canceled orders. So when borders started to reopen, to reactivate all these things again, I think takes a bit of time. The lead time is at least 12 months. That's one. Secondly, I think there is a huge supply chain problem that is happening in the world, and this is affecting the airlines. Finding it very difficult to get their aircraft delivered on time, and also servicing of aircraft, getting their spares and components, for servicing the aircraft on time is also affecting their ability to capitalize on the demand growth. And there is also some labor shortage, which is not as bad as it was earlier in the year. But as we mentioned just now, while there is unemployment in manufacturing, actually in the services sector, there are too many job vacancies, because it's difficult to fill up these jobs. So that is also holding them back. But I would say that these are all short-term problems. By the end of this year, I think these issues should get resolved, and airlines will be able to capitalize on the pent-up demand that is still ongoing.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but I kind of do. But any idea? I think what was it? The Indian airline Go Air that filed for administration, and they blamed Pratt and Whitney about engines. Is there, anything to that, or are you going to give me a diplomatic answer right now?
Well, I think, Matt, we have seen, problems with the engines and airframes in the past, and I think the manufacturers are doing the responsible thing. When something like that comes to light, they don't want to take any chances. They want to make sure that all these issues are resolved, and it's a matter of things. I suppose in the case of the Indian airline that went bust, it was just one more additional problem that they were having. I mean, they had a few problems already, so I don't think they are related, but they are not causal, but I think it's one of those things that has happened. And it's good to see that the manufacturers are doing things in a responsible way, because we don't want to compromise safety in any way. But these one-off things have happened, and not just now or during COVID. It's happened all along. So nothing abnormal about it.
Yep. You're very familiar with Australia and New Zealand and all that. I think you lived there for a while or worked there and all that. So let's go back down under. What do you see happening in Australia, New Zealand? Rex, Qantas, Virgin Australia. There seems to be a lot of, at least if you read all the press releases that I get, there seems to be a lot of the competition is pretty fierce. It seems like. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it is. It is good to see more competition. In Australia as well, and I think it is. It has been happening for some time. Virgin Australia, of course, started operations as a full-service carrier. Back in 2011, and I think towards COVID in 2019, Virgin Australia had some problems, and when COVID happened, they were taken out, so it took a bit of time for them to come back. Rex has restructured itself, and is now operating not only on secondary routes but also primary routes, So all in all, I think there was a lack of capacity in Australia, and more competition. I think is always good, but it's not only Australia. Everywhere, I think we can see competition heating up. It's good to see also new airlines coming to the fore, startup airlines. Basically, it is it's a very strong endorsement of the air travel market. That people find it worthwhile to invest in this industry. So I think from a long-term perspective, all these developments are very good.
Well, it was interesting during COVID. I mean, Bonza started during COVID actually, and have you got any idea how they're doing now?
Well, they are definitely growing. They are expanding. But it is a very cutthroat market, in Australia. So let's hope they come through and they are able to continue providing the additional services that they have been doing.
Okay. A couple of more questions, Subhas, and then we'll let you go. I know you're busy. Let's talk about what is on everyone's mind these days. It's SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel. At least, I mean, I get probably 20 press releases a day dealing with SAF. Is it ever going to scale up to the point where it really makes a difference, or is that going to take too long?
I think it will. I mean, unfortunately, this industry doesn't have many alternatives. So if you want to get to net zero by 2050, you need some measure that is going to give you, a huge lift, in your ability to reduce your carbon emissions. At the moment, it is only sustainable aviation fuels. So I think the airlines are all committed to it. But at the end of the day, the airlines are still users, so we need the supply to crank up, people say it's a chicken and egg situation, but I would rather look at it as a ham and egg situation. I think for airlines, it's a bit like the pig, producing ham is an existential issue, whereas for the fuel suppliers, supplying SAF, is just second nature. It's just starting with a different raw material, but the process and everything else is more or less the same. It's like a chicken laying an egg, this is second nature. So that's where I think we need to go, but we appreciate the fact that they need some incentives, and governments need to get into the act, not by rolling out taxes, but by helping the industry to make the transition to sustainable aviation fuels.
Well, that was one thing I was going to ask you, is about incentives, because it seems like it's the same thing with electric cars. In the U.S., they tax electric cars at a higher rate than they do in Europe. So in Europe, you have a higher take-up of electric vehicles. My brother-in-law drives an electric vehicle, actually. And so what is holding back governments from incentivizing SAF production, either by no tax or low tax or whatever?
Well, the U.S. has already started doing that. The Inflation Reduction Act actually includes incentives for fuel suppliers to start producing SAF. Not only startup fuel suppliers, but all fuel suppliers. The fuel majors. I mean, these are the guys who are currently providing jet fuel at all the airports. So we need the big boys to get into the act, and the U.S. is already doing it. The European Union is doing it a bit differently by imposing mandates on fuel suppliers, I think, which is okay, but I think some incentives would also help, I think as far as the Asia-Pacific governments are concerned, I think it's very patchy. Different governments are talking about it, but they haven't started doing it. I suppose they are just coming out of COVID, and they have had other priorities in the last few years. But I'm quite confident, that we can persuade them to start looking at it and supporting the industry to get there.
Okay, good. Subhas, time to get the old crystal ball out. Your organization, IATA, and I know these were estimates that were made months ago, 6 months ago, et cetera, that international traffic won't get back to normal until 2024. Like I told you earlier, I flew to Europe, flew to Portugal for an Embraer meeting. I just flew to the U.S. And by the way, this is my own personal opinion. Do not fly Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. It's the worst airport in the world. The TSA, and they're probably going to put me on a blacklist or something, but the TSA is terrible. But, I mean, the airports were packed, both in Europe, when I went through Frankfurt, when I went through Lisbon, and then also to the U.S. when I went through Doha and I went through Dallas-Fort Worth. Airports were packed, the planes were full. Do you think that, barring some new, and unfortunately there's a new variant of COVID out there that people are watching, that I've been reading about, but do you think this is going to continue for the next 6 months, the next year?
I think definitely it's going to continue for another year. I think new variants of COVID, will come and go. But I think the world is not going to look back anymore. They're going to move forward. WHO, I think, has learned from this experience. Is not going to declare a public health emergency just because there's a sudden surge of a few variants. Well, it depends on what you mean by normal. If you say qualitatively, I think air transport has already returned to normality. Judging by the airports, the airplanes, and the hotels that are all full, it's already returned. Quantitatively, I suppose the benchmark that we have adopted is 2019 levels. I would say that Asia Pacific will return to 2019 levels by the first half of 2024. This is a reasonable expectation because Asia Pacific's reopening of borders lagged the rest of the world by about 6 to 12 months. So I think 2024 is a good estimate. A lot depends on three things. One is cost. Fuel cost, for instance. Whether that is going to be an obstacle to this recovery. But so far, it has shown that while it's volatile, it has gone up and come down as well. So that's a good sign. The second thing is inflation. How inflation affects airlines is in terms of capital costs. the cost of borrowing, as well as debt servicing. So hopefully inflation is also moderated, and we're already seeing signs of that across the world. Inflation is moderating, especially core inflation. So hopefully that will help. And the last thing, which is really the biggest thing, which I like to call as the elephant in the room, is China. The pace of recovery of China. According to the WTTC, China will become the #1 air travel market in 10 years. Going by all estimates, I think China will double the rate of recovery in the next few months, and by early 2024, China should be close to where they were in 2019. So all that considered, I think we can be optimistic. Air travel will bounce back very strongly. Operating profits are already coming on for the airlines, and I think they will also start making net profits in a year's time.
Okay, great. Subhas Menon, Director General of the Association of Asia-Pacific Airlines. Thanks for joining me in conversation.
Thank you very much, Matt. Nice to talk to you again.
Okay, see you next time.
See you next